panel discussion on deceased data principles rights. This panel needs no introduction. We all are members of FDPPI. This panel consists of Dr. Mahendra Limay. He is the chairman of FDPPI Working Group on Personal Data Protection of Deceased Data Principles. And we have Ms. Meena Lal, Mr. Subbaraidu Talapragada, Advocate Abhay Ware, and myself, Shalini Varanasi. Over to you, Dr. Limay. I would request you to begin the session.
Yeah. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this particular debate. The idea of this particular panel discussion was, since Navi sir had that particular session regarding deceased data rights, we thought of coming up with one white paper under manner of FDPPI, because this is a gray area right now. And as a thought leader in this particular domain, that is data privacy domain, FDPPI should have its say in all the aspects of data privacy. And with that particular intention, we thought that we should provide some guidance or some observations regarding what should be the status of deceased person's data and what should happen if a person dies without making this particular choice of data. So with that particular idea, we formed this particular panel, and I am glad to share that everybody has done immense research and put his or her own contributions in this particular framework of forming this particular draft paper. But we thought that our work will be not conclusive without we incorporate all the thoughts of all the FDPPI members, because everybody is unique, having unique knowledge, and sharing that particular knowledge will be benefiting the persons who will be going through this particular white paper, or maybe it can be read by parliamentary committee, etc., etc. So we thought of broadening the scope of inputs in this particular paper. So before submitting it to the FDPPI chairperson, we thought it to present before you salient features of this particular draft report. And we have another 3 or 4 days, means by Sunday end, you can share your inputs for this particular finalization of draft paper. So we will be possibly accommodating your views if those are according to what we are looking for, and then we can submit this particular draft report, because we are already running out of time, or we have already overrun the time which was granted by Navi sir. But since we wanted this particular draft paper to be complete in every aspect, we consumed maximum possible time. And to start with how this particular discussion will go on, basically we narrowed down on 4 basic questions for all the panelists or all the participants of this particular working group, and everybody gave his input on those particular 4 questions. So the going forward, I am going to make some small comment why we are working or we are looking for rights of deceased person when he has left certain data. Because as we all know, that data has intrinsic value, and nobody can explore that particular value of that particular data. And if one fine morning somebody discovers that this particular data is of immense benefit and he exploits that particular data, then who will get the credit of that particular data? So what has happened with this emerging technology and social medias and different platforms where everybody is coming up with different sorts of data, how that particular data will be shaping up after the data principal's death is unanswered question. There are some cases or some, say, light has been thrown regarding the what will happen to this particular deceased person's data. But since this particular domain is in very nascent stage, there are no clear views, or there are some views that this particular data should be given to deceased person's heirs, or there is no right to heirs, because since it is a fundamental right of right to privacy, when that particular person dies, automatically his fundamental rights cease, and then there will be no right to the heirs of that particular deceased person. Or there can be mixed combination, that whoever is holding that particular data, whether that particular holder or repository of that particular data will have some right to exploit that particular data, and the heirs of that particular data principal will have some rights. So these are different questions which were in our mind when we started this particular research work or working on this particular data rights. And when we dug more into this particular ocean of what is data, there are a lot of issues which emerged, and it was very difficult task to finalize or narrow down on four broad questions. But what we have thought, that let these four questions be debated, automatically their answers will come up with whatever we are looking for. So now what we will do in this particular panel discussion, I will throw open question one by one, and out of four panelists, two will be expressing their views. All the participants are requested to note down the questions which were already circulated in this particular manner and come up with their views on the broad four questions framed by us. If you want to suggest some additional questions, you are always welcome, because this will make this particular research a genuine work for generations to come. So I will start with what we framed as a first question, and Meena ma'am will take that particular question, and then it will be followed by Abhay. So first question, what we decided or we framed was, do you consider personal data right as a fundamental right? Because it was extended part of Article 21, and that's why this question needs to be answered, whether personal data right should be considered as fundamental right. So now I invite Meena ma'am to express her views.
Thank you, Dr. Limaye, for brilliant context setting, and good evening, everybody. Yes, as Dr. Limaye expressed right in the beginning, this is an area which is open area and slightly tricky as well. I will share some of the developments which are happening, which have happened today as well. Now, the question that has been raised to me is, can we consider, or do we consider, personal data rights as fundamental rights? Before I dwell upon, there is a straight answer in my mind insofar as this question is concerned, and the answer is quite simple. But before we go over there, my submission would be, and it would be useful for all of us to really appreciate what is a fundamental right. Because normally we refer to this terminology very, very often. But if we have to understand, dig a little more deep into what really is a fundamental right, it should be useful for us to tread the path ahead in following up in the follow-up questions. So friends, the rights, the idea of rights that we canvass today in modern times is actually traced to Magna Carta of Great Britain in the year 1215. It is also argued that number of civil rights enjoyed by individuals find an important place in the literature of Smritis. And we Indians, who is more familiar with Smriti than we Indians? The demand for fundamental rights in India actually, for the first time, featured during the freedom struggle, and it is traced to the formation of Indian National Congress itself. The first demand for fundamental rights appeared in the Constitution of India Bill of 1886, followed by the next demand in Annie Besant's Commonwealth of India Bill 1925, and so on and so forth. Then there have been various drafts of Constitution of India. There have been Government of India Acts, and finally the Constitution came into existence with learned people like Dr. B.R. Ambedkar holding the fort for fundamental rights. You know, we, the people of India, have solemnly resolved to secure 4 things: justice, liberty, equality, and fraternity. These are actually the cardinal principles. The cardinal principles actually are liberty, equality, and fraternity. And these were the foundation on which the French Revolution was built up. Having said this, let me tell you, there is a distinction between fundamental rights and other legal rights. Before we identify the distinction, it would be useful to mention that the Supreme Court, in the famous case of Golaknath versus State of Punjab in the year 1967, had mentioned very clearly and distinctly that fundamental rights are those rights which the state enforces against itself. So state creates a limitation on the transgression that the state can undertake, and those become the rights of the citizens. So fundamental rights create a limitation for the state. Where all does the term fundamental rights appear in the Constitution? It appears at various places. The first and the prominent place is Part 3, which itself talks about various fundamental rights, which we will deal with in a bit. The other set of provisions where the word fundamental appears is actually in the directive principles of state policy, where it has been mentioned that in the process of governance of the state, it is extremely fundamental. The essential character of fundamental rights has been secured by limiting the legislative power, as I said, and by providing that any transgression of the limitation would render that law offending. And the word fundamental, where it appears in the directive principles, is in Article 37. It also means basic or essential. But it is used in Article 37, in a normative sense, of setting before the state, of a sense of setting before the state in respect of governance by the state, because we are a welfare state. And this was also delineated by Supreme Court in a very famous case, which is Ramlila Maidan case of 2012. Now, the fundamental rights which are available to us, they are equality, prohibition of discrimination, opportunity in employment. So there is a do's and a don'ts. So you cannot have discrimination, that's a don't. You must have opportunity in employment, you must have freedom of trade and profession, you must have freedom of speech. All this is a do. So like this, there is a do and a don't when it comes to understanding fundamental rights. Coming to the other rights which are available in the Constitution. So there are fundamental rights and there are other rights under the Constitution. The other rights, other than fundamental, are right to election, that is under Article 326. There is Article 301, which provides that there is a freedom of trade, commerce, and intercourse. Then there is a very important Article 300A, which will be a relevant aspect of our discussion. That is, nobody is deprived of property. So which means I have the freedom to hold property. Well, this is not a fundamental right, it's a constitutional right. So that's the distinction between a fundamental right and a constitutional right. Now, coming straight away now to the question as to whether we could consider personal data right as fundamental right. I would remind all of you about the case of Shreya Singhal, which is a landmark judgment, of course, by 2 judges of the Supreme Court, rendered in 2015, where Section 66A of the IT Act was challenged to be unconstitutional. Let me also tell you a fundamental right. To invoke a fundamental right, a party can go directly to Supreme Court. There is no need to go to any other forum. A direct forum of Supreme Court is available. That's how Shreya Singhal went directly to Supreme Court. The provision of Section 66A was alleged to be unconstitutional because the allegation was it violates the freedom of speech and expression. You know, in the famous case of Bennett Coleman of 1973 also, the Supreme Court had said, and this case was cited in the case of Shreya Singhal, Supreme Court had said that freedom of press is the ark of covenant of democracy because public criticism is essential to the working of the institutions. That's how Supreme Court interpreted in Bennett Coleman. Well, when it comes to Shreya Singhal, we all know that Section 66A has been held to be unconstitutional by the Supreme Court. And why so? The Supreme Court has said, and I quote, the ultimate truth is evolved by freedom of trade in free trade in ideas in a competitive marketplace of ideas. So we are all a marketplace of ideas. And only when there is a free trade in ideas, the ultimate truth evolves. On this basic fundamental point, the Supreme Court had struck down Section 66A. With this analysis, I come to a conclusion. To answer the question raised to me, I come to the conclusion that therefore, the right to creation of personal data is a fundamental right. And this is a well-settled law by virtue of the judgment of Shreya Singhal. Let me also tell you, friends, there is a little bit of shade which is being added to all of this. As I mentioned earlier also, we were discussing that where do you fit right to privacy into the fundamental right? A right to privacy, Puttaswamy says, has traced it to Article 21, which is of course a residuary elastic article in the Constitution. But today, only today, the Advocate General of Gujarat High Court made a very loud statement in the High Court in another context, not in the context of data, but in another context where the petitioner was claiming and seeking privacy. The Advocate General retaliated by saying, right to privacy is not like a bull in the china shop. So these are also comments which are coming in when we want to talk about personal data and look at personal data from the lens of right to privacy. I'm sure in further questions, my co-panelists will elaborate on this. Abhay, over to you for your thoughts on the same question. Abhay, you are on mute.
Abhay, unmute.
I'm sorry. Thanks, Meena ma'am. So if you look into this fundamental rights, and as Madam has nicely explained, the concept of what is fundamental right and how we connect to it, and the best way to elaborate this on an example was in one of the cases in Germany, where mother wanted the data of his deceased daughter, and that was a case, a well-known case in the Facebook, where initially the Facebook denied giving the data to it. Okay, but later on the court said that yes, this is your right, and hence your data, you can go and access your data. And it was just not giving an access, but an access fully up to what the way the daughter was accessing. It's not only giving an access. Okay, it's the way the daughter was accessing that whole data. The mother was allowed to go and get into the nitty-gritties on the account of the data. So as ma'am has rightly said, yes, it contributes to it, and it's very well required for that. Yes, sir.
Yeah, so we have somewhat consensus regarding that data right should be considered as fundamental right. That is what we panel have consensus about. But simultaneously, all the attendees should write down or make notes of their own views, because we have to have their views included in this particular draft report. Now, next, when we have accepted or we have concluded or we have come to a conclusion that data right amounts to fundamental right, then another question which immediately follows is how this fundamental right should be classified, because previously right to property was fundamental right. Then after famous case, it was shifted to constitutional right under Article 300A. So now there is a distinction regarding holding of property. It is not your fundamental rights. state can take away that particular property for welfare of people, etc., etc. So now the status of property right is shifted from fundamental right to constitutional right under Article 300A. So our follow-up question or second question, what we frame, because when we have considered data as a fundamental right, then how to evaluate that particular data is natural question, natural follow-up question. So for evaluation of that particular data, there has to be some value. And if we treat that particular data in form of property, maybe intellectual property or some other form of property, then only we can commercialize that particular data. So our next question for our internal discussion was whether should right to a personal data be classified as a property right. So again, I call upon Meena ma'am to share her views on this particular subject or question.
Okay. Thank you once again, Dr. Limay. While we are working on this project, I indeed did a lot of reading to figure out that how is the Western world thinking about data assets. I was a little surprised to find that they have started their research way beyond, and they have come to certain conclusions. Either they have come to conclusions or they have raised follow-up questions. In 1978, Lancaster predicted a paperless society. And when in 1978 he predicted the paperless society, he said, if we do not plan now for years ahead, we may find that the transition from a society full of paper to a paperless society, we might consider the transition to be one of disruption and chaos rather than one of orderly evolutionary process. And so true it is. Today, we do not really hold a pen in the hand and put it on paper. We really use our 10 fingers on the keyboard, and that's what we love. Not only we, the younger generation, by the day, I'm doubtful. So, one of the judgments of Supreme Court said that education took us from thumb impression to writing, and digital mode internet has taken us from writing to thumb impression back again. So it's very interesting and it's quite cyclical. So when I was reading this subject, the question that Dr. Limay raises as to should right to personal data be classified as property right? I would say property is of two kinds, broadly two kinds, tangible property and intangible property. Now, tangible property also, okay, let's first clear out our thoughts on intangible property and eliminate that aside. Intangible property is something which is attached to the earth, which cannot move. So it could be land, it could be buildings, it could be anything, machinery also, which is attached to the earth. When it comes to intangible rights, the intangible right could be movable and, when it comes to tangible rights, the tangible property is a movable property. That is a broad classification of property. Now, as Dr. Limay alluded to intellectual property rights, similarly, the question that arises is the data that I'm creating a property and who has a right on it? Till the time, so my study says, and the example that Abhay gave, just before we came on to the second question, I read a similar case. Yahoo has a policy which says that we do not share with anybody the data or email account or any data that we have of a deceased person. That's their policy. But a couple lost a young child, lost their only young child to a road accident, and they approached Yahoo. Yahoo said, this is our policy, we cannot give you the data. So they wanted to understand what happened and where was he going, and probably a lot of things could have been revealed by his messages, which was not being revealed by Yahoo. They went to the court. And when they went to the court allowed the parents to get the entire data that that child had kept on the platform Yahoo and all associated platforms. See, Yahoo gave the data, but they have not amended the policy. So the policies still stand in the way. Now, if we have to look at proper the data, as we said, is a creation of data is a fundamental right. Is data an asset? Surely, the literature says, as much literature that I read, it tells me that data is surely an asset. Now, data asset can be seen as a digital asset, like cryptocurrency, but we are not talking about that. We're talking of hardcore data asset. And Mr. Navi was right when we were having one of the conversations. He said, we must have a distinction between a digital asset and a data asset, which is correct. And I agree with that. So data, as far as data asset is concerned, it is most certainly, it can be classified as a property right. The problem is, the point is that as far as I am there, I am able to enjoy the property that I'm creating. I'm incessantly handling my email accounts and looking at my data, etc., etc. The real problem occurs when a person who's holding the accounts and has created multitudes of data. So multitudes of data assets could be in the form of writing blogs, photographs, comments, microblogging also, or email would indicate a lot of my personality. So how does one get hold of that property? That really is a question that we are intrigued with. Right now, India does not have any legislative framework which will address this aspect. But friends, let me tell you that it is very, very heartening to see that in America, particularly in America, people talk about digital assets and how digital assets should be dealt with. They call digital assets, classify digital asset as a third asset. So they don't club it as with intellectual property rights, they call it a third asset. And when they talk of data assets, they really say that we do not believe in writing wills. Americans believe in dealing with their estate by virtue of formation of trusts. And this is a revelation to me also. Even in India, this practice is relevant, but not too relevant. People write wills. Today, when people write wills, people don't even mention their email address. People don't even mention the password. And there is so much of documentation on the soft mode created as data asset. How does the world deal with this? Let me also bring a thought here. Very recently, I read that the legislative department of Government of India is planning to amend a lot of laws. And in that amendment, they are contemplating to amend the Indian Succession Act also. I think once we have come out with this white paper, I would recommend to Mr. Navi that we should write a letter to the law minister and recommend that these are the reasons these aspects should be captured in the Indian Succession Act as well. Having spoken about data assets from the point of view of an individual, of course, there is a huge responsibility when it comes to talking about the onus of a fiduciary. Now, like Yahoo being a fiduciary can take a position. This is my policy. But yes, we all must take cognizance of the fact that people will go to the court for the purpose of taking possession. Who will go to the court? Will be legal heirs, will be interested parties, will be administrators, executors, even executors of the will, if a will has been written. All of these people, it can be imagined that they will go to the court seeking directions from the court for directing any of these fiduciaries to pass on or to share the information with regard to the data assets. With these thoughts, I invite Abhay to share his views.
Abhay, unmute, please.
Yeah, so as ma'am rightly said, from an organization perspective, this inheritance of the properties there should be, actually should be applied to the digital assets also, because obviously the assets that has been stored on these platforms, okay, with the organizations is of immense value. Now it can be of depending on what the individual is, okay, because with the well-known personalities, or film industries or celebrities, okay, the data is of immense value. So in case now the person or the celebrity gets disease, okay, obviously the platform should be, since it is storing the data, has to make money out of it. Now the way it has to make a money out of it is something, we need to draft the policies to ensure that, that there is no harm to the that subject or the celebrity when the data is being used for a commercialization purpose. At the same time, I feel, there should be an equal, on the financial part of it, or the monetization that happens from that data should be equally been distributed between the years. So there should be a mutual agreement between the diseased years and the organization who is making money out of that content of the disease years. And as you know, in Singapore, we should have a limit also on this part of it. With the Singapore law, which keeps the data for 10 years of time. Okay, the similar limitations, should be making sense to have in India, because on a technical perspective, keeping a data for a longer period of time and then taking a litigation out of it, someone coming after 10 years and then making litigation doesn't make a sense. So 10 years limitation should help in this case. Apart from that, in case these organizations have to share their data, I feel, with the mutual understanding and without, affecting or maintaining the CIA of the disease data, no one should be allowed after the date of the disease data to be modified. On a technical perspective, all of this access should be restricted. So policy should be made that once a person has expired, his data should be only in a read-only format. Okay, so that integrity, the CI confidentiality, integrity, and availability is remaining. Both the organization side as well as the individual, the data subject, both are benefited from that give and take. That is my thought on that.
So second question which we framed for our research was, should right to personal data be classified as property right? And as both the panelists pointed out, that it should be classified as a digital property, and it can have some value into it. So it can be either passed on to heirs or whoever is holding that particular data. So as we said, this is very gray area. It is very nascent stage and there is no case laws behind, and we have to evaluate or evolve our own minds and come up with certain suggestions. So broadly, our consensus is it should be classified as a sort of digital assets or digital property, and it should have some values like what happens with will or transmission of that particular property. The next question which we framed was whether personal data should be retained by data fiduciary after death of data principal. And now I call upon Shalini and Subbaraidu, because they were working on third and fourth question, what we had in our this particular project. So either Shalini or Subbaraidu can start and exchange the roles for question number 3 and question number 4, because those are intermixed questions. And fourth question which was framed was, can consent manager exercise data principals right past their demise? Because once we have framed the questions that whether it should be retained by data fiduciary, automatically consent manager can be considered as data fiduciary. So these two questions are overlapping. So for this question number 3 and 4, Shalini and Subbaraidu will give their own perspectives.
So before I go ahead to share my views on question number 3, I wanted to say that, I also have a few sections mentioned in my write-up, so I'm happy about it. So the question number 3 is whether personal data should be retained by the data fiduciary after the death of the data principal. I think to find an answer to this question, we would need to find out the lawful basis as used by the data fiduciary for processing of the personal data, to in turn understand the required retention period for the personal data. PDPB provides for different lawful bases. One is consent under Section 11, and other grounds for processing personal data without consent in certain cases, as under Section 12, covering, for example, processing as required under any law for the time being in force, or for compliance with any order or judgment of any court or tribunal in India. So these are the lawful basis as covered under PDPB. In addition to this, Section 9 imposes an obligation on the data fiduciary to restrict the retention of personal data till the time necessary to satisfy the purpose for which the data was collected. And data fiduciary is expected to conduct periodic reviews to determine the necessity to retain the data. And in case personal data is required to be retained for a longer period, then explicit consent will be needed. Therefore, we will need to know two things before we decide whether a data fiduciary can retain data after the demise of the data principal. First, the lawful basis, and secondly, the required retention period to determine whether personal data should be retained after the death of a data principal or not. For example, the data fiduciary will have to stop processing the data in case consent was used as the lawful basis and dispose the data accordingly. And for instance, the data fiduciary can continue processing the data of a deceased data principal as may be required by the law in force. For example, in case of employee data, the employer might need to retain and process the data as per relevant tax law or labor laws in force. We want to discuss two scenarios here to say that regardless of the commercial implications of the processing for the data fiduciary, the data retention depends on these two factors only, which is the lawful basis and the retention period. Here, I would like to request Mr. Subbaraidu to discuss two scenarios with examples for the same.
Okay. I wish I was just an audience because the discussion is so interesting that I just wanted to continue hearing it. So now, as Charlie has mentioned, see, there could be two broad scenarios that we're saying where there is some commercial implications for the data involved and where there are absolutely no commercial implications in all other cases, right? So obviously, where there are commercial implications, some examples that one can take is supposing there's an individual who subscribed to a particular software or subscribed to some music streaming service, right? And he has given his consent at the commencement of, let's say, whatever is the subscription period, that he intends to avail of the subscription for a particular duration, and he has also agreed with the service provider to continue paying for that particular service. And supposing suddenly some untoward incident happens, and this person is no longer in a position where he can continue to avail the benefit of the subscription services or something that he had intended to, what should be done? See here, where commercial implications are involved, the case, although I mean, I'm not a legal expert here, so I'm just kind of, coming at it from a slightly different angle, partly commercial angle, partly from perhaps, what is ethically right, what is from a business point of view, what's ethically right or not. Instinctively and intuitively, the answer that one arrives at is, if it has been communicated, if the person who's processing the data, the organization that is processing the data, has been brought to the fact that this person is no longer existing and is a deceased person, if that is brought to the attention of the processor by somebody who is duly legally authorized, then perhaps it seems to make sense purely from a common sense perspective that perhaps the processing should be stopped. And here what we are seeing is that as of now, the absence of a uniform law seems to be the hurdle, because each and every single service provider is framing his own terms and conditions. And I think it would definitely be useful for the citizens of India, and perhaps citizens for any other country, that, in order to cut across this clutter of different terms and conditions, uh, each country were to frame its own laws as to, okay, within our legal system, this is the way uh, the data should be processed when it has commercial implications. So that's the real important part. And I think, as Navi sir has rightly taken the lead here, uh, particularly we've seen the tendency of MNCs to kind of take refuge to either privacy or certain other laws and try to continue to process the data till, as long as possible. It definitely makes sense for FDPPI to make a provision and perhaps say that, okay, when there is some commercial implications, this is the way everybody who's conducting business in this country is expected to behave when data has got commercial implications. Definitely, maybe not from a legalistic point of view, but from a, now I'm putting myself in the shoes of, let us say, the legal heirs of, let us say, the person who's been deceased. They might purely look at it from point of view of sheer wastage of money. I mean, if the person has subscribed to some streaming service and is no longer in a position to, avail the benefit of that streaming service, logically, legally, ethically, it seems to make sense for the law to empower them to approach the service provider and say, boss, the person who had wanted to subscribe this service is no longer alive. So can you kindly stop doing this? So there must be some mechanism, some legal background for them to approach the service provider. And the service provider should not take refuge behind privacy provisions or any other terms and conditions that they have created to suit their own commercial benefits and say, no, we had a contact with that person, or as per privacy, we can't. And they should not be allowed to take the stand that they should go ahead and continue the processing the transaction till the time the contract period has come to an end. That's what my 2 cents of this panel would be.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Like this makes me think like, for streaming services, still there is a duration for which, the money that was paid by the data principal might keep it in effect for longer than their lifetime. But in case a service like Audible, where you are buying digital books, which are add up to quite an investment in books, for such services also, we might seek provisions wherein these assets could be transferred to the heirs who are requesting to have them. And also, like in absence of data privacy provisions, when we say that there is no lawful basis and the law requires data fiduciaries to delete the data once the purpose is met or the consent is not valid anymore. So before the heirs could realize or reach out to data fiduciaries, they might just end up, deleting all the data and not wait for anybody to take a legal recourse to reach out to what they wanted to know and have out of the digital assets of their deceased family member. So yes, if Navi sir could have a provision added in the law itself, that will be great. And I also wanted to share, like Mr. Subbarayu said, there could be instances where heirs might request to access the data, since PDPB does not cover any provision on handling of personal data of deceased individuals. As of now, the heirs will have to depend on the policies laid down by the data fiduciaries, like Mr. Subbarayu said. We looked into the policies laid down by some companies around this, and Mr. Subbarayu has already covered Yahoo's email terms of service, which says that upon receipt of a death notification, along with a copy of the death certificate, the user account is terminated and all the content therein are permanently deleted. So that way, like you mentioned, Mr. Subbarayu, that the heirs won't have access to the content And before they even take a legal action, Yahoo might just end up, deleting all the content as per its policy. And here, I want to request Mr. Subbaraju to add more examples of company policies on treatment of deceased personal data.
Yeah, in fact, I had, thanks to FDPPI and Navi sir in this immensely interesting topic, I suddenly recollected having read somewhere about a case where Apple versus FBI. That was an immensely interesting case that I came across, where there was there was a terrorist act that happened in the US, or in fact, there was a suspected terrorist act that happened in the US where a guy who went around shooting people with a gun and caused about some 19 or 20 odd deaths, which is famously known as the San Bernardino shooter case. And yeah, as a result of that, he himself was shot down by the police authorities. And it so happened that he had an iPhone, and the investigating authorities were very, very keen to get access to the contents of that iPhone, purely to try and find out whether this guy was acting alone or he was acting in concert with a couple of other people, whether this was an organized terrorist act or this was simply the act of a demented mind who was kind of lost his balance and, with a gun in his hand and doing something. And they approached Apple company to kind of help and assist the FBI in unlocking the phone. It seems that in the operating system of Apple, what they've created is that there is a 4-digit code. And if this 4-digit code is typed in incorrectly for more than 10 times, all the data in this device is permanently encrypted. And nobody can ever have access to this. And the FBI was kind of scared to do that because they wanted to kind of get into the device and find out whether there was some useful information which would be useful from an investigation perspective. Now, we in India might be very used to the fact that, when this Sushant Singh Rajput case happened, we saw in the news that, this WhatsApp chat was there, that WhatsApp chat was there, and everything was kind of flowing on the television screens. But there, at least in the US, the privacy concerns being that much higher, Apple simply refused FBI's request, and FBI had to approach the court. And even then, there was a huge movement with the entire Silicon Valley arrayed against the investigative agencies in the government, and Apple got a lot of support from a lot of Silicon Valley tech companies and said that no, under no conditions should these codes be handed over to the FBI. And the FBI also had additional requests saying that going forward, they wanted Apple to keep some kind of a backdoor into the devices so that should such situations arise in the future or in the interest of national security, if FBI wanted Apple to provide some information about this encrypted information that is on devices, FBI was wanting Apple to kind of cooperate and Apple flatly refused. So these are again examples where, it was privacy versus, whereas we know that even from whatever little of the constitution I have learned by part of FDPPI, we know that fundamental rights of privacy are subject to certain reasonable restrictions. And within the list of reasonable restrictions, national interest, maintaining a public harmony, maintaining friendly relations with other countries and something, our constitution and our laws have repeatedly held that these provisions can be struck down and privacy can be kind of overridden. But apparently in the US, this was not the situation.
Absolutely.
So,
yes.
a case where, maybe food for thought for a lot of our specialists to which direction do we want our privacy law to take?
Right.
Dr. Limay, or we want to chart a different course?
Right.
I think we have.
We've taken more time.
As previously we exceeded time given by Navi sir, we have also exceeded today's panel discussion allotted time. So we will have some quick questions from our audience, and as far as possible, we will try to satisfy those questions also. So audience, please, your questions are welcome.
Audience don't have speaking rights, sir. So I will.
Okay. Adepu sir has raised his hand.
Yes. So Adepu sir has asked a question. Is a written content in blogs is a PII? Is written content in blogs is a PII?
Yeah, if somebody has written about his personal experiences, then that can be turned. So it is all reference to whatever is mentioned in that particular blog. If somebody has put his secrets of life in that particular blog, or like secret codes, whatever he is using for different bank accounts, etc., etc. So that may be so. These all questions currently are subject to, according to me, because unless we scrutinize what is the exact content of that particular blog, we cannot give just passing remark as that it is PII or non-PII. So
Right.
as a legal perspective, always we try to play safe. Yes, it can be or it can't be.
No,
So
it is, I believe it is a PII, but like, in all the company policies, companies mention that it is in control of the individual. It is a PII, but it's in control of the individual. So the individual or the user is responsible for that data, not the company,
yeah,
not the
other
platform.
questions?
Yeah, so Ms. Bengeri has asked more questions. What is,
In
sorry.
fact, Mr. Adipo has asked another question, which was just above.
Okay,
this
okay.
question.
I thought that was a
And
description of something. So I'll read out that one first.
yeah,
A
and
living
Shalini, you have covered
person.
this, so you can answer it very well.
So let me read out
Yeah.
once, and then you can quickly add. A living person can have and use or exercise the right on personal data as a fundamental right or constitutional right, but a person's rights cease to exist after the death. The person whom the PII belong is no more to take or exercise a decision. Then we should check we can own the PII of the expired person.
So this was Shalini, your point with respect to the consent manager role, where he can play a very well role with the deceased.
I could not cover that part, but consent manager's role is limited, and they are designated as data fiduciaries only. So they cannot exercise rights once the person passes away. They will also have to stop the processing because they won't have consent, valid consent to support their processing. Now coming to Ms. Bengeri's
No,
question.
just I want to add,
Sure, sir.
coming
Sure.
to similar question. Interestingly, recently in a judgment pronounced by Delhi High Court in KK Singh, that is Sushant Singh Rajput's father's case versus Sarla Saraogi, the court held, Delhi High Court recently held that right to privacy of a celebrity extinguishes upon his demise. Such a right lives and dies with the deceased, and thus the plaintiff cannot attempt to exercise a right which has ceased to exist. So whatever we were recommending, Delhi High Court has exactly come in contrast with that particular recommendation. And this particular judgment is very recent, pronounced by Delhi High Court, that deceased means celebrities' rights extinguish when he is deceased. So this is one of the judgments. This sort of judgments will be reversed. This sort of debate will happen, but we have to consider all the points. So what Adepu has asked regarding the question, this is one of the recent observation of Delhi High Court, but ultimately it was in some different context. Later on, the total judgment was based on some different context, but this is the observation that presently court has said, that once a person passes, the data rights cannot be transferred to his heirs. That is one of the judgments. So we can take next question, please.
Ms. Pengeri has asked, what must be the criteria for identification of the legal heir? And before you answer this question, I have a request to the attendees. If you could please transfer the questions from the chat to the Q&A section. I'm unable to track the chat box. Thank you. So the question is, what must be the criteria for identification of the legal heir?
So there can be different criteria, like for banks or etc. Even nomination would do some higher property transfer matters, etc. affidavit before registrar or legal hair orders are required from the court. So depending upon the policies framed by that particular organization, these sort of rules and regulations can be fixed. But presently we can base on either how bank accounts are means property in bank accounts is transferred, how lockers can be transferred, how the benefits of LIC policies are given. And I think Meena ma'am has some additional suggestions to this particular question. Yes, ma'am.
So what I want to say, slightly, qualifying what you said, Dr. Limay. See, today, when the bank deals with a nominee, let's understand this, a nominee is not necessarily a person who is in law entitled to the property of the deceased. There is a distinction between a nominee and a heir who would be inheriting the property. So therefore, the way the banks are dealing on the basis of nomination may or may not be fully applicable in this situation, is what I want to say. So therefore, coming back to Reena's question of what must be the criteria for identification of the legal heir, perhaps today's process of obtaining a succession certificate is a very long drawn, harrowing procedure that needs to be simplified when it comes to claim to data assets of a deceased. That needs to be simplified. Otherwise, people cannot be told to go and have a succession certificate first. That will be a very harrowing thing to do. So in my view, that needs to be simplified.
Right.
It can be even registered will also, means that can be how data can be transferred. So data will can be another option, because will, again, issue will be there whether will is means will transfers the property to heirs or some other person. So I think her question regarding heirs was that who will get that particular data after decease. So that can be seen in that broader perspective. The next question, please.
Yeah. So Ms. Bengeri has also mentioned that it may be a good idea to cover some scenarios to derive commercial implications for data fiduciary. Yes, we are looking forward to cover more scenarios. Like within our group also, we are asking one another what we can think of to add to the scenarios. So please, all the members are requested to, share scenarios which are coming to their minds. And next, Ms. Pengeri has mentioned, if there is a will left by the deceased person covering digital assets, heir, rights, value, etc., how will that be considered by law? Will the will be considered supreme, even if it may be inadequately covering all digital assets?
Can I answer the question?
Yeah, ma'am.
Sure.
Yeah, ma'am.
So, Reena, what happens is in today's scenario, when we have no clarity about how to deal with data assets of a deceased person, today I have 10 properties which I have identified and written in my will. After I've written my will and I've registered my will, if I want to register, and then I acquire an 11th property. Okay. Your question is precisely that even if the digital or data assets are not fully mentioned in the will, how will the legal heirs proceed? So therefore, when one writes a will, one has to say that whatever I have acquired, I have enlisted over here. What I may acquire in the future also will have to be treated in a particular manner. So the will have to be encompassing of what I have and what I may have later after writing the will. That takes care of part of the problem. Now, in the will, suppose I write that in the will, my Gmail account will be available for viewing by my husband. Suppose I write that. Then my husband will be able to produce the will. And on that basis, Google will be able to Google must, not should, but must share all the content of the Gmail. I'm just giving examples which are of a day-to-day life, and then we need to extrapolate them to complex issues. So that will be sufficient. But if I mention in my will something about owning, something about some money in PayPal or Google Wallet, any other monetary platform, that will get divided in a particular way that I write in the will. Then in that case, the law of the will take precedence. The manner in which I have mentioned that the property will get divided or apportioned amongst my heirs, that will take precedence, obviously. The problems are if I have not written a will. When I do not write a will, it's an open field, open canvas for litigation, for all these issues. So the first struggle is how to get the data, and having got the data, then the rest of the struggle of inheritance begins.
Now I want to read out Mr. Kodandram's input here. Privacy data covered under PDPA belongs to principal, and it cannot be treated as property of the fiduciary. Once the privacy data is anonymized, then it can be owned by the fiduciary as it comes out of PDPA coverage. Only on this property rights could be exercised. This itself may not fetch value unless it is covered into useful information. Just a second. This itself may not fetch value unless it is covered into useful information having utility by others. At this stage, we can label them as property in intangible nature. When it is used to earn revenue, it could be evaluated. Mere possession of privacy data of others cannot be both ethically and morally marketable, and it is also violation of fundamental rights.
These are mostly suggestions by, I think, Kodandram. So we will.
Dr. Limay, I'm cutting and pasting, copying and pasting these inputs so that we can refer to them later as well.
We can certainly work
Yes.
out on it.
Yeah, and there is input by Ms. Ruchika Kumar. Right to privacy is a fundamental right, agreed. But my personal data is my asset like any other property. I alone have the right to decide if, why, when, and for what purpose my data may be used. So I am of the view that right to personal data will be part of my right to property. Fundamental rights can only be enforced against the states, whereas my right to property can be enforced against private entities as well. Your thoughts, please. So, Ms. Kumar, I am copying and pasting your thoughts because we need your inputs and we will go through this. Dr. Limay, would you like to add something here?
Basically, the same dilemma we are facing, because once we said it is fundamental right, when we shift it to strictly property rights can be enforced against other individuals also. So that is proper or apt observation. So we have to nomenclate that particular data right as I say digital assets or some different sort of right. So we are working out on same, because we are facing a lot of challenges right now. And since we are at very early days of how to give this particular rights or disease data rights, we are forming some opinion and we want to have some consensus in this particular draft paper. And that's why this whole exercise was made to make certain inputs from our FDPPI members. And that's why we have done this exercise. So these all suggestions, again, we will consider. Those who have not put their suggestions, they can also come up with their suggestions, their views, and then we can finalize the draft and then we can present it. So those who have some good suggestions or whatever they feel about this particular topic, they can come forward and share their views.
Absolutely. Dr. Limay, I want to ask, can we use 4 more minutes? Because there is a question from Mr. Adepu and 2 more inputs by
I think
Ms.
Meena ma'am
Ruchika Kumar.
want to add something.
Yeah, Meena ma'am, can I read this question before you add to it? Because this is again regarding will.
Okay.
By Mr. Adepu. He's asked if a person mentioned PII as an asset in his will it be sufficient? Okay.
Okay. No, I was actually commenting and reflecting on the question, the thoughts which have been provoked by Ruchika's observation. Now, Ruchika, there will be 2 aspects to this. The conclusion that we gave on the first question creation of data asset is my fundamental right. So there will be two compartments. That's my view to begin with right now. Creation of data assets will be my fundamental right. That is freedom of speech, expression, etc. But whether that fundamental right can be, whether it retains the character of a fundamental right when I'm enforcing it against the state, that becomes a different aspect. It's a different shade of the same thing. So therefore, you're right in saying that fundamental rights can be enforced only against the state, whereas my right to property can be enforced against private. Therefore, right to property, you are aware that is not a fundamental right, it's a constitutional right. So it will change the character. So Mr. Navi also always tells us that data is very dynamic. It will keep changing the character. Depending upon the context, the character will change. So that's a clarification I wanted to add
Meena,
to Dr. Levi's. Yeah.
Sorry. Meena ma'am, did you go through the last two inputs by Ruchika Kumar, or shall I read it for you?
No, I am going through it. So
Okay, so I can read it for you.
Okay.
Okay. I feel that personal data cannot be classified as digital asset only. Personal data is also stored in physical copies. Would it not be advisable to classify personal data as any other intangible property? And then I want to read the last input as well by Ms. Kumar. In a scenario where, no, sorry, with this only. Do you want me to read it again? Because I spoke in between. So.
No, that's fine. So, see, it has to be personal data. It cannot be classified as digital asset only. You want to say that it's stored in physical copies also. Yeah, that's fine. The content. So you see, property is not what is in paper or soft medium. The content, the value of what resides there becomes the property. And therefore, personal data can be stored in physical copies. My employer can take so much of detail from me and store on physical. So personal data is right now the topic that we are wanting to cover is the data assets of the deceased. So we have really not pondered over this issue because it becomes a separate nuanced point that would it be advisable to classify personal data as any other intangible property. Now, personal data, I am doubtful whether it is, whether it can be called an intangible property in the sense of IPR, or it needs to be always classified as something else. So that is still a debate, at least in my mind.
So another question by Mr. Ruchika Kumar for the panelists. In a scenario where processing was done on the basis of valid consent taken from a data principal competent to give such consent, will the consent vitiated by a future event, even if that event is the death of the data principal?
So
yes.
If that is possible, or if you say in a contract terms, if there is impossibility of performance of that particular contract after some event happens, then there will not be a strictly performance of that particular contract because some subsequent event made that particular contract to become impossible for performance. So all what is we are trying to do is we are also trying to consider many hypothetical questions, because these hypothetical questions will be reality in coming days, and we are working on all these sort of questions. So these are all questions which we are debating or we are discussing right now. So we welcome all such hypothetical questions so that our paper will be more appropriate. That is what I can add.
All right. So, Dr. Limai, we've covered all the questions and inputs.
Avi sir, you want to add to it?
No, of course. I have my own views, which I have already shared once, and perhaps will continue to share. But quickly, certain points. One, data. We don't have to debate whether it is tangible, intangible, etc. It is a new class of asset. Nobody else knows what is it. We will say this is a class of asset like this. And the transfer of property in data can be done either by a separate legislation, or we should look at Personal Data Protection Act itself as a transfer of property act in respect of data, which we have classified as a new kind of asset. So once you take that view, you are going for this parallel thinking. So don't be bogged down by our existing thoughts and try to fit everything into the current thinking, because several things on data you cannot fit into specific slots of other assets. So for example, this data fiduciary himself, how do you create a beneficiary? There's a data principle, and we are creating a data fiduciary who is the beneficiary, who has to take care of the interest of the data principle. He transfers some information. Now, this information, whether it can be considered a property to the extent it has a value. Whether it can be transferred, if it is transferred, it is being transferred like a sort of a lease kind of a thing. That is, the rights are transferred, not the property. I have got certain rights, and out of which is one right, which is I can use my personal data for selling or something like that, like an intellectual property right. I have a right on my intellectual property, and I use that to sell or transfer it to somebody else so that he can in turn sell. So likewise, in personal data, it is basically a data which has a value. As long as it is having a value, I can transfer the use of it, like in the consent manager. And the consent manager on my behalf may sell it to Google, may sell it to Yahoo or something like that, whoever gives me the better reward. So let us look at data as a new class of asset, not try to fix it in any known slot. That is one observation. Then we may need a data inheritance law. And in the absence of a data inheritance law, we will say that PDPA is a new law coming. Government can always add one section there which talks about this kind of a situation, and it can itself become a data inheritance law. The other point which came up was about deletion of data. That is, after the death of a person, should the data fiduciary delete? Now, delete is a destruction of an asset. The moment we understand that the asset has got a value, it cannot be destroyed by a third party. Of course, processing can be stopped. The decision to stop processing is very easy. The moment I know data subject, is not alive, his contractual instruction in the form of a consent ceases to be valid, and therefore I should stop processing. But I may have to archive it and keep it safe so that the legal heir can make a claim. Now, the question is, in this context of transfer of rights, whatever rights the data principal had during his lifetime, whether it can be transferred after his death is something which the law has to define. Okay, I think it can be done through a will. In the will, if of course, will cannot be written in electronic form in India, but a normal will, let us say it is written. There I say my mobile property, my insurance policy, etc. I can also list that I have got multiple digital accounts, all of which I will transfer. Now, nomination is one aspect which we need to consider. The law has to provide for that. Joint holding of data also has to be permitted. Why can't we have farmer or survivor kind of an account for my Yahoo account or a Google account? That is, as long as the person is alive, he will be the sole person. But I should have in banks, we have got something called farmer or survivor, different from either or survivor. Either or survivor means during the lifetime of both the people have the right. In the case of farmer or survivor, during the lifetime of that farmer, he alone has the right. Survivor doesn't get any right. But on his death, the survivor inherits the power to operate the data. So we can consider that this data inheritance law, which I am talking of, which I feel can be embedded into the Personal Data Protection Act, or even it can be a modification to the Transfer of Property Act, as Meena was asking. But instead of going to the Transfer of Property Act and making an amendment, I would rather like to make that amendment in PDPA itself, where people understand what is the data as an asset. So some of these issues, that a data inheritance provision should be brought into the Personal Data Protection Act. If not today, the PDPB may not be possible, but next amendment of PDPB, which may happen, it can be brought in. So this thought can be put to the government that this is something which we need to do. Then we come to this nomination. Joint possession of personal data is recognized even now. That is, community privacy actually recognizes a joint possession. Now, when we are talking of whatever these Google accounts, Twitter accounts are concerned, as somebody was pointing out, we thought of content. Content has got intellectual property, okay? That is undisputed, okay? And that can be even transferred. Intellectual property, if suppose I have written an e-book. Now that e-book is a property which I may have to transfer to somebody else. I think the law provides for transfer of such things by an ordinary instrument like a will. But what we are talking of here is like the access to my Google account, access to my Dropbox account. Now in my Dropbox, I could have put in my Bitcoin wallet details. It has got a huge value also. Now, after the person dies, if Dropbox says, I will delete all your Dropbox data, then all the Bitcoin assets will be lost. Okay, so therefore, deletion should not be recommended.
Absolutely.
But they have to try to find out the legal aids. That is why I have suggested the various process similar to banks, that you have to find the legal layer, you have to have a claim process and so on. So it should be archived and then a process should be started. Normally in banks, when we have such a situation, we want the legal aids to come to a court process and tell me what I should do with the property. If there's a nomination, I provide the money to that nominee and tell him that I am giving it to you as a trustee of legal heirs. So it is your responsibility to take care. If you don't distribute it properly, you are answerable to the court. I will not do anything more. So if a nomination for data can be accommodated, there also only that much can happen. It will ease the procedure as far as the data fiduciary is concerned, that he will be able to transfer the data control to a particular person. If in that process, simultaneously 2-3 people approach, in my case, a bank, and here data fiduciary, that I have the right kind of a thing. Normally, we freeze that asset. We will not give it to either this person or that person, and we suggest to them to go to the court and bring an order. If in the ultimate, if they are still quarreling and making us inconvenient, we ourselves go to the court and ask the court, please decide this particular dispute and tell me to whom I have to hand it over. This kind of process, which is well established in the banking system, can be brought into the data, because data is an asset. We can say that Indian PDPB has looked at privacy by design policy like a prospectus. So there is already a thought process that data is raised like money being raised. Okay, when you raise a debenture, you have a credit rating for the debenture. Now, if you raise personal data, you are having the DTS score. That is how the concept of DTS can be defended. So similarly, we have to import some of the experiences from the banking field. And as I have told earlier also, in the case of lockers kind of a thing, where a person does not know what is the asset inside, he cannot get a succession certificate because he cannot apply for the assets. He doesn't know whether there is 100 jewelry there or whatever is there. So in such cases, bankers have a system of providing limited access to the contents of the locker in the presence of the witnesses and tell the legal heirs, you can take a look at what is there, take an inventory, then we will put it back in the locker. You go to the court and take a succession certificate. Similarly, in the data storage also, perhaps, since the person may not know what is the content, there could be such cases which will have to be handled. There may not be a perfect answer to many of these things, but we have to start looking at this, and whatever suggestions we make should be able to take care of these multiple scenarios. This is what I just want to add. Maybe when you prepare a report, put it in such a manner that we should be able to tell the government that this is a problematic situation. We must address this, and we must have a data inheritance provision put into, if not the current this thing, because the current this thing, they are already telling it is too late to make any amendments. We also understand that this is a major amendment. It has to go back to another JPC kind of a thing, but there will be an amendment possibility sometime later. So this will be something which will have to be looked at in the future. And let us try to prepare a report which gives us the opportunity to send a suggestion to the government at the right time. Okay. Yeah.
Thank
Thank
you,
you.
Navi sir, for your thoughts on this. Dr. Limai, Ms. Bengeri has asked, will the document draft be shared for review? Before we close the session, I thought I'll.
No, before closing session, we cannot, but we will certainly share.
No.
the draft.
I meant to for you to answer this question, not to share the draft. Yes.
Okay, so we'll be certainly sharing the draft. We'll making it open by Monday, so everybody can go through it, put suggestions, and then we will finalize the same and submit it to Navi sir for final topping on the cake, and then it will be presented accordingly. So we sincerely urge everyone to put his or her efforts into it, so that it will be really look like coming from the normally what word uses data organizations in data privacy. So naturally government will have to consider this particular draft. So that should be our feeling, that when FDPPI is suggesting something, government has to accept it by some small amendment. So we request everyone to add whatever they can, and then we can submit it. So it will be a nice presentation from our part.
Thank you. Thank you. You use the word Dada something. What is that?
Dada means
No.
the
You said FDPPI is Dada of data privacy, is it?
Who can
it
flex
is
the
in good
muscle?
sense. It is in good sense. It is in not
It means
gunda
he
sense.
meant by Dada, he means 2 steps ahead of Didi.
No, good terminology. Okay. Okay. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you all.
Thank
everyone.
you, everyone,
Let's
for
conclude on this
participating.
Yeah.
Thank
On
you.
behalf of all
Yes.
the people, I will give the vote of thanks to all of you for having spent a good time in enriching all our participants with some new thoughts. Keep going ahead with the finalization of the report. We will take a look at it and make it one of our, published papers, which should come in our July DPJ journal. Okay. Quarterly journal will be due in July. So I want this paper to be available for that. Okay.
Certainly.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.